Good afternoon, right? It's a tough call to take a speech now because this is lunchtime, so I'll try to keep you awake and make you, well, patient, waiting for the food which is coming afterwards. Ravi, you had too many kind words for me. I come here, I'm sure I'm going to state many obvious things in the hour to come because many very literate people have spoken before me. But I'll try to bring the testimony of somebody working in industry, in technology, to try to solve a big problem. You reminded, or you told everybody my origins. I come from farming origins. I had no idea about business. Nobody was in business in my surrounding. Took my first plane at 23. But I came, at least in my position, with very strong convictions on nature, our relationship to nature, the way we impact it, and also a passion in life, which is whitewater kayaking, which is a place that reminds you every day that nature is the strongest. And I believe also in technology, because I don't think technology, we can escape the evolution of technology, and probably technology is the only way to resolve the big issues that we have in front of us. But I'm really happy to be here today because we're going to speak about emerging countries, and I've worked 30 years in emerging countries. I had the privilege to be part of a small team that started Schneider in China, and be part of a small team that started Schneider in India. And today those countries are number 2 and number 3 countries for Schneider, just after the US, right? And in China we employ 28,000 people, in India 37,000 people. So these are massive presences, inclusive of technology, manufacturing, on trying to impact the challenge, which is the second reason I'm really happy that we are here, is the challenge of sustainability, making sure that we make sure our planet remains sustainable. So now I've been working for the same company for 38 years. People will tell me, oh, it's very boring, right? Okay. But I think we reinvented multiple times the company, so I had the impression to do very different things. I think you have 2 choices in life. One is to change all the time companies. The other thing is to transform your company so that you have multiple lives within the same company. And as you accumulate experience and knowledge, then you can really make a larger impact. But when you work, or you've been working for the past almost 40 years in energy, you realize that you are at the core of 2 critical challenges of our generation, and those 2 critical challenges are conflicting. The first one is progress, and I'm going to speak about that. For anybody who's lived in emerging countries, and I've lived in emerging countries, your life is miserable if you don't have access to energy. And when I work in energy, my first topic is not sustainability, it's to make sure that everybody on Earth has access to energy. And we'll speak about that. And the second thing is to realize that energy is at the core of sustainability because, well, climate change is coming from carbon emission. 80% of the reason for carbon emission is about energy. So if we change the way we produce and consume energy, we resolve climate change. But I'm going to start with my strongest conviction. When you are in business, don't forget one thing. When you are, actually I would say when you are in life, when you love life, don't forget one thing, it's all about people. I mean, where you're going to look back at your life will be as interesting or as important as the number of people you're going to have journeyed with. But when you start and we look at a business, you have to zoom out and to look at the world population. So really stating the obvious here, but look at 2022 and 2050. Well, 2 conclusions, at least, or several conclusions. Number one, well, 90% roughly of the world population is outside of the US and Europe. So 90% of the things really happening are happening outside of the zone of comfort of many. And the second thing, when you look at this population, this is the reason why I've been living with my family for the past 20 years in emerging countries, 55% of the world population lives in Asia, where people are working hard, studying hard, and really trying to change at a very, very fast speed. But now you fast forward 20 years, which is pretty important for you especially, maybe a little bit less important for me, unfortunately. But in the next 20 years, when you look at that, we're going to be 2 more billion people on Earth. And more than 1 billion will be born in Africa. And if you look at the past 20 years, Asia at the center of everything, and Asia remains 50% of the world population, but the next 1.5 billion people is happening in Africa and in Asia. And one of the reasons when I was lended the keys of Schneider, I spent a lot of time in emerging countries, is that I've always been convinced that a large part of the changes of the world would be happening where 90% of the world population will be born, and 100% of the new population of the world will be born. Now let's talk about the issue in terms of energy. So that's the carbon emission top here today, 2022. So we see that China is 31% of carbon emissions. That's coal-based power, right? Coal-based, not electricity, but using coal in many, many things, fossil fuel energy. Then you see that Europe, US, 10% of the world population, 25% of the carbon emission. And the rest has a relatively small impact. So now let's think about the challenge. We want, or I think it's the objective, should be the objective of everybody in the world, want that everybody in the world gets to the right level of development. So the most important is not this graph at the top, the most important is this graph here, which is the carbon emission per capita. And you see that the US is emitting twice as much as Europe and China per inhabitant, and I'm a European. I think the level of living is roughly the same. So there is a problem. Professor before, or the World Bank, Francisca was speaking about productivity. You see that energy productivity is not only a problem in the emerging world. There is a small problem of productivity here respect to this, right? And then you see what the people in India and Africa are emitting as carbon per capita. And this has to change because those parts of the world really have to develop. So now we are today emitting 36 kilomillion gigaton of carbon a year. And that is putting us on a trajectory of 4 to 5 degree increase in temperature with all the catastrophes that we see happening around the world, including the US, if you remember last week with a hurricane that happened. If everybody was going to the level of emission per capita of the US, we are going to 146 gigaton. The world is unlivable, right? And the IEA, the International Energy Agency, as well as people taking commitments, have all committed, we are all committing to be sort of carbon neutral by 2050, which means a very simple thing. We cannot do this to this, we need to do 36 to 0. What does it mean in very simple terms? Is that the present model doesn't work. We've lived in a world with one form of generation and consumption of energy. This model, if we keep going with it, we are straight in the direction of the 100 to 150, and that makes the whole planet just unlivable. So another way to present it is this, is today we are 8 billion people in the world, 5 billion people have a correct access to energy, roughly. We need to provide in the next 20 years, it's not the next 100 years, it's not the next 50 years, the next 20 years, which is the first 20 years of your professional career. We need to provide energy to 5 more billion people. The 1 billion people who don't have access to energy at all today in the world, coming back from 2 weeks in Africa, many of them have met them, have seen them. We have to bring energy to 2 billion people who have a little bit access to energy, but not enough to get access to the status of middle class, to get their kids educated and everything. That's the world of today. And we have 2 more billion people joining us in the next coming 20 years. So it's a multiply by 2. And if I go on the right side, these are the curves of consumption of energy. At the top, you have what we are facing if we keep the same model. The blue one is the curve that we are having if we go to all the commitments which have been done by all the companies and the countries around the world in terms of energy efficiency and carbon reduction. But if we want to go to a 1.5 degree, we need to go here. And where I say we have to change the model, that means what can we do to save this impossible equation? It's number one, we need much more energy efficiency and circularity. That was mentioned by Francisca before, but not at all what we do today, we need much more. The second thing is that we need to move our energy usages from fossil fuel to electricity, because electricity is the only way to decarbonize. And when we speak about energy, very often the debate becomes very heated and very political at times. It's about, I don't like nuclear, I don't like windmills, I don't like this and that. But energy transitions do not happen through the supply of energy. Energy transitions happen through the usages of energy. Cars will not be electrical because there is more electricity. There is not much more electricity. Cars will be electrical because some crazy guy in California on the Chinese industry has decided to create electric cars which are more economic, more performing, and easier to use. So if you want to transition the planet to a more sustainable model for all, we need to transition the way we use energy. And the only way to decarbonize is to go to electrical. And then finally, all the projections say that there will remain some fossil fuel. So there's a lot to be done to decarbonize fossil fuel and to capture carbon. So it's a sum of things to do. But there is one good news here, actually two good news, is that we've seen disruption in the world of energy in the past 20 years like we've never seen before. The first one is digitization. And you remember digitization, the internet, born in the 90s, and it changed completely the way we live and we work together. The way we hail a taxi, the way we have a meeting on that. We have just entered into the episode 2 of the internet, which is the Internet of Things. And that combines IoT, big data, AI, software, digital twins, and so on, to live in a completely different manner with our environment, and especially to be much more efficient. You apply digitization to a building, you can easily save 30% of energy. You apply digitization and electrification to a building, then you can save 50 to 80%. That's number one. Digitization for much better efficiency. And the second thing is electrification. And somebody would say, but electrification is an old technology, but it's not the same. It's provided by renewable, stored on batteries, decentralized, and so on. So if you put that together, those two things together, then you go to a world which is much smarter and greener, and which is much more decarbonized, and actually which even changes the model of energy, because all of us, we can produce our own energy, and we can save our own energy. And we know what we are doing because being digitized, it's all measured. So let's look at what's happening, because I don't think people have really realized the magnitude of the change. Over the past 40 years, electricity used to be roughly 20% of the way we consume energy. So for 20 years, always the same thing, 20%. So people speak about electricity a lot, but 80% is about fossil fuel. Now, if you take the forecast of all institutes, electricity will jump up from 20% to 40 and actually 50% of the world energy consumption. So 20 years from now, when we meet around this table, 50% of what you do will be powered by electricity. Major change respect to what was happening before. And that is, even as we speak today, people say, okay, it's fine to do electricity, but electricity uses, I don't know, coal, gas to be produced. Actually, if you look last year, 80% of the new capacity of electricity was produced from renewable. If you project yourself only 5 years from now, 50-50 of the world electricity will be produced by fossil fuel, 50%, and 50% all by renewable. So it's a major change which is happening at very accelerated speed. And it's going to be more and more decentralized. You remember, or or you know that when we speak about energy, we refer to large companies, and they provide us energy. So energy is that sort of thing that comes from a state, a government, large companies, something that falls from the sky, and frankly, we can't do much about it. Well, today, 50% of what's installed in renewable is coming as decentralized. So people who put that on the roof of their home, the room of their company, and they are now becoming of a producer of their own energy. So you integrate within your own company or your own home, your own power plant, and you become your gas station if you have an electrical car. That means you create or you produce the energy necessary to move your car. So that's a major change also, which I'm very excited about, because it means that it empowers people to manage their energy and therefore manage their contribution to the fight against climate change. So now let's look at the world. There are two logics here. There are the developed countries, which represent a large part of the carbon footprint. And here, the big topic is to retrofit everything, because everything we've built over the past 100 years is not fit for net zero. The whole model was built around fossil fuel, more drilling, more carbon, more combustion. So we need to retrofit. Now there is only one problem, is that when we do retrofit in many of the emerged countries, developed countries, we think about building insulation, doing big works, which means that today the rate of retrofit, would it be in the US or in Europe, is less than 1% of the buildings every year, which means that only 10% of the buildings are net zero compatible today. We're going to be ready at best in 90 years to be net zero. I remind you that most of our countries have taken the objective to be net zero by 2050. I have a problem personally with 90 years. Number one, it is not compatible with my life expectancy. And I've decided really to resolve this while I would be living, right? And number two, it's absolutely not compatible with all the objectives of our countries. When Europe is saying we have to be net zero or carbon neutral by 2050, we are retrofitting to be ready 100 years from now. So that's number one. So very simply, we need to retrofit 4 times faster than what we do today, which is impossible if we do just construction, which is highly possible if we do electrification and digitization. But it means that architects, designers, planners, mayors, construction companies have to rethink and change the software of what they are doing. And the second thing is in emerging countries, while the figures are absolutely staggering, we worked with the Indian government 1 year ago, and we said, what does the development of India and Africa mean to sustainability? And we sort of zoomed out on the whole thing, but basically in the next 20 years, we are going to double the building stock in the world. So we are going to rebuild a planet of building once again. That's what it takes to welcome the 5 billion people on the table of development. And we'd better do one thing, is to build it as close as possible to net zero from day one, because otherwise we are just doubling the problem. So it's urgent to work together to develop the new technologies at a low cost point, because most of that will happen in emerging countries, and to make sure that what we build, which is new, is built as close as possible to net zero. So now there are opportunities for new economies, because new economies are late starters by definition, and therefore they can build anew and much better than what we have done in the US, in Europe, in Japan a long time ago. And what we see as opportunities is they can be more competitive, because the price of solar combined to batteries today is coming to not only grid parity, but also to coal parity, at least in China. The efficiency of electrical usages is 3 times better than the one of fossil fuel. An electric vehicle due to its design, is 3 times more efficient than the traditional car, and a heat pump is 3 times more efficient than the gas boiler. So to start with, before speaking about control thermostats and those kind of things, you consume 1/3 of the energy for the same result. And finally, it's an imperative because today you have 86% of the global population who live in countries which are dependent of other countries in terms of importing fossil fuels. So every time the price of fossil fuel is increasing, that means the economy of those countries, wherever they are, Europe, the emerging countries, those countries are becoming strangled by the variation and volatility of fossil fuel. So it's about affordability, it's about security, and of course, it's about sustainability. So now, when we look and we work all around the world and we try to project to 2050, the only way to resolve this equation and the way, if you try to look at things, the way things should evolve, well, the consumption of energy will decrease in mature economies. That doesn't mean the comfort will be less. Everything has to become much more efficient. It will decrease in China, because I'll speak about that, and I think it has been touched this morning. China is super active in resolving that equation of process and sustainability. And it will increase in new economies, especially Africa, 1.5 billion people, and in India also, because India is the other country part of the very close club of populations of more than 1 billion people, right? And that need to develop. So let's start with China. 30% of carbon emissions. So it's easy at times for other countries to look at China and say, what you are doing has a huge impact. But China has much more population than many other countries in the world. It's 1.4 billion people. It's 4 to 5 times what you have in America. And China has managed to extract several 100 million people out of misery in the past 30 years, which no other country has done to that speed so far. For reasons of history, because I developed this operation in China together with a team 30 years ago, I've always stayed a little bit close to academia, economics in China. And from the beginning, from 15 years ago, China said very clearly, energy will be a huge bottleneck to our development because China doesn't have resources but coal, and decided to put all the emphasis of development on clean techs, on development. So China has understood that the world, the future is electric. So while the rest of the world is at 17% of its energy on the form of electricity, 20% to simplify, China is already at 30% of its energy consumption under the form of electricity. So far ahead of the rest of the world. And now, when you look at solar, China is producing 90% of the solar panel. And actually, every year there is as much solar installed in China as in the rest of the world. China is today putting on the road 50% of the world electric vehicles. I was in Shanghai 2 weeks ago, 60% of the new vehicles are electric with a flurry of new models. And China is producing 70% of the battery storage on Earth. So a country that has decided to migrate from a heavily fossil fuel carbon emitting industry to a model to an electric and low carbon model, right? Also investing in nuclear. Today, as we speak, 20 nuclear power plants being built in China. India is a different culture. More decentralized, of course, less centralized. So we work a lot in India, and we did that study with the Indian government. I hope my figures are not diverging too much of the one presented this morning. But we saw 2 times energy demand by 2047, which is when India should become energy autonomous, but 6 times electricity demand, right? So a clear impetus or emphasis put on electricity in India. And at Schneider, for instance, we do in India things that we don't do in other parts. We supply solar roofs with batteries to 100 million families in India. So giving energy autonomy in a very different manner outside of a centralized grid. So that is a world where we should be 20 years from now. Buildings will be completely different. Transport will be completely different. And industry should be completely different. And I don't know about you, but for you at least, who are starting somewhere your professional career, you can live in the middle of that revolution and actually drive it, putting together innovation on specific business models to make this new form of energy affordable to all. So that's about the frame, which is probably the main thing I wanted to share with you. Now I've been asked to share about Schneider. And don't launch me about Schneider because I can speak for hours or ages about it, and it will be even more boring. So we started, or the company was founded a long time ago, but I was landed the keys as a CEO 20 years ago. And at that time, we are doing electrical products, mostly circuit breakers, you know, things that control your electricity. Where we are today, we've merged together digital and electrification to produce smart buildings, smart homes, smart transport, data centers, industries, utilities, microgrids, and so on. And when you look around in the US, we are probably in 40% of the US buildings. We are 40% of the homes. Most of the data centers, when you click, we power your click. And we try to do it in the most efficient manner possible. Having that vision that energy would be different, I'm rewinding 20 years ago. I'd been living at that time with many people in my team for 10 years at least in emerging countries, where you could see that energy is absolutely a fundamental right for everybody, but energy is the source of the biggest pollution and biggest problems. So we adopted from the beginning that our technologies should allow people, empower people to achieve more while using less of their resources. And therefore, we embarked on this IoT, big data, clean electrification, which means that as a company, today we are a big digital company. 50% of our business is about digital, $20 billion. Software, IoT, big data, all dedicated to the management of resources and energy. Electric, we are by far the world-leading company in supplying electric solutions to bring electrons from the grid to the usages. Sustainability, 70% of what we do with customers is to help them to reduce their carbon footprint. And I told you that I saw that emerging countries would be the pivot of the change. Well, we multiply by 15 our size in emerging countries, which today is roughly 50% of our business. So I see sometimes people opposing sustainability to economics. I'll try to explain to you that actually just the contrary. If you align sustainability with economics, you are, as we say in whitewater kayaking, you are surfing the tide or surfing the wave, and that puts you in a much better situation to improve your economics. I'm going to fly really fast on those because it's all about Schneider, and my point today is not to proselytize about Schneider, but we are very global. And one thing, as you work on emerging countries, I would like you to understand is that the world is not one, and I don't think the world is aspiring to be one. We are coming from very different cultures, which have thousands of years of history, and when countries emerge, the characteristics of those cultures, of the systems are re-emerging, so the world will be very diverse. It was maybe less the case in the past 50 years, but the world will be impacted by the Chinese cultures, by the Indian cultures, by the African culture, and will be much more diverse than in the future. So what we've done at Schneider is making sure that each region could impact by themselves. They would have their own R&D, their own manufacturing, and actually 80% of what we sell in Europe is different from what we do in North America, and is different from what we do in India, because the systems are very special. Then, to reconcile economics and sustainability, positioning ourselves as a champion of technology for sustainability was very beneficial for us. We multiplied over 20 years the size by 4. We multiplied our market cap by 12, actually 14 as yesterday, And we are part of the 3 companies in the world which are the most invested by ESG funds. So I just, again, kayaking lessons, you never paddle against the current. I mean, when the tide of the change is there is no way to fight it. And I think, on the contrary, you have to accelerate the necessary transition. Then, it's all about people again. Having or aligning your company with sustainability gives you tremendous business opportunities, but more so, it gives a compass to the people joining your company. And when you operate in 100 countries, it's important that people have that compass of values, of direction, of purpose. And that is a self-selecting thing which makes on the company, your company more attractive. When you go also in sustainability, it's not only about your company. Actually, it's more so about your responsibility over the whole ecosystem. Take the example of Schneider. Our carbon footprint, only 1% is in our scope 1 and 2. On the rest, 15% is with our suppliers, and 85% is with our customers. So when 20 years ago we started our journey to sustainability, we said, look, first we help our customers. So today we help our customers save 100 million tons a year, which means that technically we are already net positive because we have only 60 million tons of carbon footprint. And then we have engaged with our suppliers, 1,000 of them, to reduce and cut by 2 their carbon emissions. And the most important is that when you have the chance like us to work in clean energy, we've brought clean energy to 50 million people. We've trained 1 million people to those new trades of clean energy, people who are coming from farming origin, actually, and helped many of them to create their own company. So speak about impact. That impact is multifaceted and directed to all the stakeholders. So now let's speak. There is one reason why I decided somewhere to go in industry. I think a company is a unique place where you can mobilize people with great talent coming from many countries and many origins, with the right financing, with the right support and with the right connections to have the right impact. And I won't dwell on that, but these are the things that over time we've come to do. We are doing, as we speak, and we are speaking about emerging countries, the world's smartest grid. And I'm not speaking about the US, where we equip most of the grid with smart systems. I'm speaking about Egypt and Thailand for the latest deployments. We are doing energy positive building and factories. I was in Singapore 1 week ago, where with Takeda we did net zero, actually, zero positive factory. That means their factory is producing more energy than it's consuming. We are doing the world's largest unified operation centers, which means for companies managing very complex systems, they have everything on a digital repository, and you can click every space and really help everybody to do better with their installation. We are doing the largest data centers, which are a real challenge at the moment with AI. We are doing bringing clean electricity to homes. I was speaking about India, which is our largest deployment. We did the first net zero polar station with a Belgian scientist. So the only station in the South Pole that doesn't emit carbon, that works only with renewable industry. And that has been probably the most exciting experience for engineers in our company. We are training people and we are doing microgrids. When I landed in JFK last week, we are redoing the whole electrical system of JFK to make it green, renewable, and secured, and resist power outages when they happen. So my preach here is to say this is a huge challenge, and this is, according to me, the biggest challenge of our generation. There are technologies that we can work on to deal with energy in a very different manner, but it needs deployment, it needs mobilization, it needs change, and the change must happen in the next coming 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Get your questions ready, because I think we want to get as many as we can. As the mics get to you, let me ask the first question, JPT, if I may. You referred to your time in China and South Africa, and then also in India. And how did your stints in those emerging economies influence your thinking about the strategy for the company?
A lot, enormously, because when you live in the comfort of somewhere of the West, even I would argue that where I come from in France is an emerging country, right? Small place, rural, didn't take my first train at 14, my first plane at 23. Those were very, very isolated places. But when you come, when I was living in China in the 90s with Alexandra, with my wife, we had a power cut one day without electricity a week. And you realize that that day, you are really diminished, right? You can't do anything. And when I was in charge of sub-Saharan Africa, many of the places have no energy, and you can not speak of anything, education, health, and anything, till you don't have energy. So I think, while if you rewind back in 2000, that was a time where the world was drilling, extracting, burning. It was more energy everywhere, right? We were the only company to say, no, the future of energy has to be really to achieve more, but using much less. And that is really coming from that experience that we were all having in new economy. Seeing clearly the barriers. When you were living in Beijing in 2008, there was smog where you couldn't see anything. So pollution, stop speaking about carbon footprint, right? You could see literally all the effects of the wrong model in terms of energy. So the urgency to resolve all of this is not only about climate change, it's about health. You saw the red clouds on the Himalayas that we saw before. And it's about multiple things, but it's about life quality, right?
Thank you so much for your insightful talk. I just wanted one question to be clarified. That was, how did you mobilize your stakeholders? You mentioned that quite a bit of the carbon footprint happens at the suppliers and the customers, and you wanted them to be engaged. So I was curious about engaging supply chain partners as part of your sustainability initiatives. How did you go about it?
Very tough. So you have. I believe in people and collaboration. So when you have that sort of contrarian conviction at the beginning, you have to find like-minded people somewhere around. And I was very lucky that 20 years ago there was this new initiative at the United Nations called the Global Compact, which was to say politics can't succeed without business. On business, we are looking desperately to have a link with regulators, countries, and everything. So anyway, we're one of the first adopters or first members of the Global Compact, which was ESG at large. And that gave us a little bit of mass to go to see suppliers and customers to say, we would like you to nudge you into that direction. But when you are alone, nobody cares. But if you are 10, that starts to carry a little bit. So anyway, cut a long story short, I just finished 6 years at the global board of the Global Compact. But today, at that time, we are 3 companies. Today, we are 25,000 companies, all working around the SDGs, same objectives, same directions, and helping each other. So that's number one, coalesce. Find any way to coalesce. Second thing, make it economically interesting, because people oppose sustainability and economics. Every time we work on energy efficiency with digital, the payback is within 3 years. So actually, it's crazy not to do it. It's like quitting smoking. Like, you feel better, you are richer. That's as simple as this. So people, when they speak about climate change, they speak about long-term innovation, horizon. It's going to be too late. A ton of carbon today saved has 10 times more value than a ton of carbon in 10 years' time. It's cumulative. So what you need is to focus on the low-hanging fruit. 70% of carbon emissions can be eliminated today with existing technology at a good economic return. What's blocking? Our way of thinking. I'm going to take one example, a building, right? The building industry has been working all the time in reducing the cost of the construction of the building. the cost of the construction of the building is max 20% of the cost of the building for the whole life. So you've got people like pressuring on all the cost at the moment of the construction, and they will incur a lot of costs for all the tenants for the next 50 years. So we've got to think on the total life cycle of any installation, and we need to think about the circularity of things. So that's coalesce, have a good economic return. I would add one more thing is make those who work with you much more competitive. So when with a supplier we help them cut their carbon footprint by a factor of 2, suddenly they can go and see many customers by saying, you've subscribed to a SBTi objective, I'm the right supplier because I did that with Schneider, but we work with you. And you see incredible things, you know. In business, it's forbidden to work with your competitors. One exception, when you coalesce to reduce the carbon footprint of your whole line of business, which we are doing with pharmaceutical industry, semiconductor industry, and mining industry. So I don't know if I answer your question, but but it takes a long time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hello, here behind. Thanks for this presentation. This is really very interesting.
Yeah, where are you? Right.
Here.
Stand up.
Okay. I'm
Tell us
standing
who
up.
you are.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm Gloria Ferrer. I'm actually teaching at Northeastern Strategy at the business school, but I'm a consultant working for the World Bank and USAID and all these projects. And we've been following very closely the work of Schneider because of our analysis in jobs and all that part. And my question is related to jobs. So according to your experience through all these years in the company, how the jobs have been, so it's a double question. First is how the jobs have been changing in integrating not only electricity, but the smart component and the sustainability, so from engineers to what type of jobs, and also how these jobs have been changing in the emerging markets. So are you creating new types of jobs, like related to the previous speaker from the World Bank that she was talking about, the green jobs in emerging markets are repairs, right? So like bicycle repairmen, so are in these new building systems like digital plumbers that are needed, like more local people needed to understand and to maintain a building. So yeah, just...
Yeah. Well, we've done a lot of studies on that. Number one, in emerging countries, I think the number of jobs is not impacted by those revolutions, really, because we are speaking about new build, and putting a heat pump instead of a coal-based or gas-fired boiler doesn't change a thing. Actually, it creates more jobs because then you need to digitize. That means you add more things, but those are much more local jobs because the old model of energy is intensely centralized in big power plants, big grids, into the hands of very few companies. While when you deploy decentralized systems on homes are energy independent, on building largely energy independent, then it's a lot of local jobs close to the communities. I spoke about the example of 50 million people we brought electricity with. When I started this in Africa, that was more than 20 years ago, it didn't work because we were donating equipment. And if you just donate equipment, people take the system, they split it, they sell it, and that kind of thing. So then we created an operation which was training people that would take care of the systems, developing technology, and helping people to create a recurrent business, therefore profit from it. So training people, creating business for sustainability, and developing the right technology. And then it worked, because suddenly there was a local entrepreneur who was developing that, recruiting people, taking care of the system for the community, and decarbonizing with a local interest. So every time you put that in place, but we had done a study in the European Commission. Going for energy efficiency and decentralization is bringing infinitely more jobs than having very centralized systems, because it's about going into all existing buildings and digitizing them. That's number one. Number two, much more interesting jobs. because you are speaking about digital jobs. It's inside the building, it's a little bit of code, it's a little bit of, so it's very practical, right? I love to do those jobs. I still have my farming origins in me, but it's much more technology on simple technology, but it's really interesting, and you learn from the data. So on number 3, it's much safer, because when you digitize things, you don't need to open the door of a dangerous electrical cubicle or a machine to know what's happening. It tells you what's happening and you know where you have to start. So it's much safer to do those interventions. So all in all, I think it's very job productive, but not in the hands on one company. It's a very widespread ecosystem with a lot of local entrepreneurs and a lot of different business models. I don't know if I answer your question.
Jean-Pascal, sorry.
Where are you? Where are you?
Here.
Let's hear from
I'm
Stuart,
here.
I think.
Okay.
Jean-Pascal, I'm here.
All right.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Larissa, also a professor here at Northeastern, and I want to shed light to my region of the world. I think we have been talking about India and China and Africa, but I come from Latin America and have been working with Caribbean countries in their journey through a more resilient infrastructure that encompasses energy too. And thinking about how fragile they are and how their infrastructure gets destroyed frequently with hurricanes, flooding, and rising seas. What is your insight in how to attract investment to the region that will support that transition and better quality of life for that population? Do you work in the area, in this region, insights?
I think we work almost everywhere. Look, we work there on. The whole thing is always the same. Somewhere, if you want to change a paradigm, you need to find solutions which are easily scalable. So the more decentralized they are, the easiest. And you have to tackle, as I was saying, I will repeat myself, solutions with a good economic return and with a short time of implementation. Well, I happen to live in Hong Kong, and we get 2 typhoons at least a year, and we've got to repair our place at least every year. So I sort of understand the problem that you are talking about. Much more difficult when you are in poor countries, but I think the more you push the investment on the responsibility close to the point of usage and to the point of the users, then people really take care of it, and they really think about the way. And also large infrastructure for centralization like grids are very vulnerable. If you have a typhoon, they get taken out. It takes a long time to build them back. I think the future will get much more resilience when we get more points of connection, microgrids closer to the point of usages. Not saying it's easy, but that's what we are doing.
Hi, hello. My name is Carolina. I'm a 4th-year student at Northeastern. I was recently doing a climate change investment research co-op, and what was talked a lot about is that sometimes net zero indicators miss the adaptation part of the story. So I wanted to ask, if in this analysis of AI data centers, you also include resource depletion that comes with it, also with EV cars. I know with data centers, they use a lot of water. Yeah. So how is this also being integrated into the sustainability story, also with EV cars that have a lot of resource depletion in minings and critical minerals? So how is this being integrated into this electrification and digitalization of
That's
the
a very good
sustainability
question.
story?
That's a very good question. So I'm speaking about that energy migration to electricity. It will need to be much more efficient at the point of usage. It's going to need to be also very different in the point of production. And I won't start again with decentralization and microgrids on those kind of things. So AI is a very interesting point in case, right? It's really the revolution of the past 3 years. AI has been here for a long time. The Gen AI takes as a sort of components GPUs, which are consuming much more energy, and Therefore, we have specialized on data centers for a long time at Schneider. So today it's roughly 25% of what we do. And it's a super exciting place because it's the most technological part of anything we do. And it's the highest density of energy per square foot that you can find on Earth, right? Those layers of servers and chips and everything, that's really impressive in terms, and everything is digitized. And when you guys are computing, sometimes you move parts of computing on energy has to follow in real time. So it's really complicated. Now, AI is a step change in this. So it took us roughly 30 years to bring 50 gigawatt to data centers. On predictions say it's going to be to 100, if not 150 in the next 5 years. So it's a huge surge. But now let's be a little bit. Let's take. I like figures because ideas are nice, but we need to figures ground them to reality. So today, whatever this surge at IT and technology has represented, it represents data centers represent 1.3 to 2% of the world electrical consumption. On electricity is only 20%. So it's less than 1%. The surge of AI with the figures, as I just said, means that it might go to 3 to 4% of the world electricity consumption, which is, again, only 20%, soon to be 30% of the world energy consumption. So it's very, very limited in terms of surge. Now, there are two ways that we use AI. We can use AI to do TikTok and to exchange pictures or to do fake things on whatever. That is not bringing any positive impact on the environment. At the same time, if we deploy AI into smart buildings, smart industries, and smart transportation, then you are addressing 70% of the carbon emissions to which AI can bring at least, I think, 20 to 30% of savings. So 20% of the world energy consumption as a benefit to be compared with less than 1% of the world energy consumption as a negative impact. So the only thing is that every time you click on your Insta, on your video stream, or you binge videos, just realize that your impact on the environment is pretty heavy, right? It's still small because IT is in fact 2%, it's 10% of 20%, but that doesn't bring much to the environment. If we leverage AI to do what I was explaining, the benefit is huge, right? Now, you said also something about minerals. I think we have also to realize that if we want to fight climate change, we can't have it all, right? Fighting climate change will be about substituting fossil fuel by batteries, solar panels, which are produced with minerals. So we're going to need to use those minerals, copper, lithium ion, and so on, lithium, and so on, so that we don't use the Nespresso capsules of gas and oil every day. And we're going to have to do that in the cleanest way possible, but there is no way we can do that revolution without mobilizing the right minerals. And those are tough choices, right? Or people say, I don't like nuclear for electricity. And Schneider is not in nuclear. So they use our digital studio, but it's very, very small. But at the same time, nuclear will be necessary probably, because it's the only way to do zero carbon electricity for a base load on that scale. So I don't think we can fight this huge challenge without making a few trade-offs, and we just have to make sure they are safely realized and that they are done as cleanly as possible. I don't know if I answer your question. Yeah, you police the question, right?
Hi.
Yeah.
My name is Tanmay, and I'm also a student interested in sustainability and emerging markets. So one problem that I've seen, at least with India as an emerging market, when they're trying to implement a lot of renewable energy schemes, is that they face the usual chicken and egg problem, where there is a lot of investment, but they don't implement the investments because there is not a lot of infrastructure built. There is not infrastructure because there is not a big market. So what are your suggestions, or what do you think about how we can go to solve such a chicken and egg problem? Because that's something which is evident with EVs, solar and wind, all three in India?
So it's a bit over this. When you look at new electrical capacity in the world, it's 80% renewable. So you are already at cost, which makes it competitive. So now, of course, you need financing, you need return on everything. But in all of those things, you need never just to speak about technology. You need to put together technology, you need to put competent people, that means trained people. We have a lot of people trained to design, we need people to install all of this, right? And then you need business models on a fast return on investment. So when you guys will be working in the future on those topics, never forget, actually you should start by people behaviors. I'm personally always more interested by microeconomy, what makes people tick, than macroeconomics. And you have to think about how do I make sure that some people are making money along the way, because otherwise that thing will die, right? But I think in many places things are really changing. I come back from South Africa, right? On South Africa had terrible power outages because the utility ESCOM was failing to, well, because of this huge constraint, 5 gigawatts of solar were installed in 5 years. And before people were saying not possible, we don't have the right economic trigger point. But you know, constraint sometimes is the mother of all innovations on changes. It's just really thinking in a different manner. Now, every time in your career you're going to build a new infrastructure, a new building, a new plant, a new research center, tell yourself that it's going to be here for the next 50 years or next 100 years, and maybe the short-term economics will tell you do it the cheap way. Well, you have to think what will be the value of that asset 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And what I see in the world is that people are really rethinking on taking into the TCO of every project into account.
Yeah, you want to ask you a question? Please speak into the mic.
Thank you very much for your presentation, very inspiring one. I'm Getia Souza. I'm from Angola, located in the southern part of Africa, and I'm a petroleum engineer. So I'm here as a research fellow at MIT. And Angola is the second largest oil producing country in the whole Africa, and also 90% of our economy relies on oil. Currently, we have just developed the largest solar panel project in the whole sub-Saharan Africa. So we are making an effort to transition from the conventional type of energy, not relying on that, to the renewable and sustainable one. My question is for countries that are having that challenge in order to transition from the conventional type of energy to the renewable one. So what's the best approach that you think that those countries would do in order to transition that and be successful in implementing renewable energies?
Yeah,
Thank you.
well, thank you for your question. We're actually also in Namibia, which discovered big, huge oil reserves also on look, I don't know how to answer that. I'm looking around, and I think some countries are showing the way. I think one in Europe is Norway. Norway has big fossil reserve. They put them into the sovereign fund, Norges, which is actually one of the biggest shareholders of Schneider. And at the same time, as they are very rich with fossil fuel and could bask into fossil fuel, they are also the most advanced country in Europe for electric vehicles, and their electricity, thanks to hydro, granted, is the greenest in Europe. So some countries are really reinvesting the money, the short-term profit of fossil, to create a net zero infrastructure, which actually, even from business point of view, makes sense, because as they use less of their fossil, they can sell it to the people who are not virtuous from that point of view. I think it's all, the question is, at times, history is offering countries a step to kickstart their development, and what makes the difference is the way you use this money, right? But it's the case for many countries. And therefore, you can, on one side, benefit from those resources, and at the same time, build infrastructure, or build a country based on renewable resources, because you think about the future. I think by large, what Saudi is trying to do now is going into that direction also, benefit from the resource of fossil to build industry, to build renewable base, which I've never seen before.
JPT, there are so many people who want to ask you questions, but the clock is ticking away. So I'm afraid we have to start to wrap this up. But would you like to give any final words of advice to the young students as they launch their careers?
That's a big responsibility. I was not a great student to start with. But look, I don't know. I think we are living a tremendous time, right? Of changes, of disruptions, of technology progress. Still, personally, I regret that the trend is for countries to be a little bit more isolated than in the past 30 years, but which I think is a very bad trend. You gain nothing in isolating from each other, but the room that we have here with people coming from, I perceive, many, many parts of the world is very encouraging. Look, you are facing 20 years where what I describe is one of the major challenges on opportunities that needs to be faced, and that will need people who think, but more so people who act. So, and it's not the only one. I mean, AI will take a lot of chores from our daily life, and that will allow us to be more productive and spend more time of quality on the things that matter. So the only advice I would give you on referring to my own personal experience is go to the places which are far away from your comfort zone. Because by definition, those are the places where you learn the most. Go to places where the people are the most different from you. Because by definition, that will make you much more flexible and you're gonna learn so much. I've never learned as much as when I was going into difficult business in difficult places. And I think if you are lucky to survive those things, what doesn't kill you make you stronger, then you build first an inner knowledge and strength, which is far above the people who stayed with the mainstream. And I would finish with one consideration. Some people ask me, how did you become CEO of a company for 20 years while you had not the right grades, not the right origin, not the right anything? I say it's very simple. During the first 15 years, I took the jobs that nobody else wanted. And when you do that, don't take any sort of bad job, but when you take the job that normally people want to take the job where you have a lot of people, a lot of turnover and things, take the jobs where you have to create. And if possible, create your own company. But take the jobs that nobody wants, and 15 years after, people will look around and say, that person is really different. And that can change the profile of your career. That would be my only advice. Otherwise, have a very good lunch, and it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful.